Hello everyone, how are you guys doing? We are on our coffee time segment. My today's guest is a human rights lawyer and a governance expert hailing from Zambia. Her life's journey has been an inspiring tale of advocating for positive change and empowering the youth and women in Zambia. Her name is Ruth, and she's named as one of the 2023 Zambia's top 30 under 30. What a nice title. Ruth, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And
So,
thank you for having me.
yeah, thank you so much for giving us your time, for coming here. We met before. Your energy, I have told you that before, and I would love to say it again. It is something that inspired me today to have this conversation with you.
You. I'm so humbled by that.
Yes. So,
And I
to,
am definitely excited to be on the panel on the platform and yeah, to just dive into the conversation.
Oh, yeah. So I know you're so passionate when it comes to women, when it comes to gender based violence, when it comes to human rights. That's what you do, it's your passion. So let's start with human rights, the understanding that we have about it in our continent, Africa. I believe it's something that we see it as a luxury, something extra. So let's start with how we perceive human rights here in our continent, Africa, from your
So,
perspective.
so just like I said, conversations like this remind me of why I do what I do. Beyond being a human rights and governance lawyer, I believe, Sega, and you're aware that I also lead a social movement in Zambia and on the continent in terms of peace and security, where I bring back my human rights expertise and background to do what I do, to empower the young Africans, especially that have the energy and the vision to rewrite the current status quo of our continent. When we're talking about human rights, let's start with the first big elephant in the room. Human rights in Africa, there's a lot of misconception and people misunderstand because they've been framed as foreign or Western concepts, right?
True.
But if you were to look quite closely, African cultures have always emphasized for things such as dignity and the right to life, just by virtue of being born, because that's what human rights are. Um, by a person just being born, you're inherent with the human rights that are given to you, promoting for fairness and the rule of law. But these two are human rights from our African culture, and they've just been passed down in ways that aren't always written in legal language or legal documents. But the real issue here isn't so much of whether we understand human rights, but it goes a bit further to say, how have we held systems across our African continent accountable for delivering and protecting people's human rights to ensure that people know that they've got the human rights, but they're able to also exercise and have their rights protected, right? For
True.
example, on the African continent, we've been able to see that, young people being silenced when they demand for change, when they protest, already their freedom to express or their freedom to associate has been curtailed. And it's contradictions like these, I believe, that make people lose trust in be it governance and institutions. And I believe the only way that we can change that is we need to talk more about human rights in our own different contexts, but to make them understood even to the ordinary person. We may take it for granted, right, that leaders don't protect people's human rights, but maybe there's also a different perception that they've had about human rights or an encounter about it. I can give you an example. Remember, in Nigeria, where they had the SARS movement, right? It wasn't so much about the police brutality, but you had young people at the forefront who were really demanding for a system change where the police could really make the citizens feel safe, feel valued, and respected. And that's a human rights conversation that needs to be rooted in African realities. Even here in my country, you will find that. if people want to express themselves, they need to ensure that they follow the due process of the law. Of course, we've got laws that are very colonial for a country that was colonized. I believe that uh, Ethiopia can't relate, right? Um, we've got a lot of laws that were left over by the colonial masters that really hindered on people's freedoms, their human rights. But I find it very retrogressive when we still have public order acts that are still governing our modern society today. And as a result of that, if people want to go out on the streets to take their frustrations, they are often found at the end of the law where those colonial systems still oppress them. So I think in terms of human rights, we need to take and do more in terms of creating awareness of people knowing their rights, but also helping government leaders, state institutions understand that their duty is to protect people's human rights.
That is, you just explained it so well. But you know, I believe that we say more than 70% of African population is the youngsters. We have a
Very
huge
true.
number of young people, and
Yeah.
we don't understand the resource. We don't understand the all the good things that we can get out of
Yeah.
that, I believe. So how can we, you said it yourself that awareness is really important. We should create that awareness that people should know about their human rights so that they can engage on those things that they should. So let's talk
Yes.
about, because you're a youth advocate, let's talk about how we can engage the youth when it comes to the rights and the obligations it has,
Yes.
and at the same time on how to take the right steps, have, you know, choose the right way of expressing
Mm, mm,
their feeling inside. And at the same time, the change is within us, I believe, because we've been protesting back then, we're still
very true.
protesting. And when is it going to end? What is it that
Very
we're
true.
doing that
Yeah.
we're not understanding? What is it that we're missing? So as a youth, as a person that works with the youth, I want you to tell me what the youth should do to participate more in the political sphere, or maybe to know its rights and its obligations.
So here's the thing. I want to take it off and flip the coin, right? Young people certainly want to be engaged. I'm a youth, even just beyond Zambia. You and I met at a continental level of where we do our work. We're allowed to be young people. We're not very apathetic, and there's a wrong notion about young people just wanting things very eager. And now we've got Gen Z that everyone wants to talk about in their different countries, right?
Yeah,
But they need to understand that there's a lot of barriers in most of our countries on the African continent that hinder the participation and meaningful participation, or the representation of young people. And there's a lot of gatekeeping and systems that favor either the same faces over and over again. And it gets very exhausting, but it's not
true.
impossible to overcome. I believe that the solution, Sega, lies in the fact that we need to promote for more intergenerational conversations, intergenerational co-leadership, where we lead side by side with the older generation. I always say that we're not trying to kick out the older people. I mean, their time should come and they should realize that there's going to be a period for transition, right?
True.
In all kind of fields, be it in the private sector, in the government, in the politics. But we need the older generation to begin to teach us now and to nurture us to be the shapers um, of decisions that we will be able to be part of for the future. Imagine how detrimental it will be to be the recipients of decisions we were not part of making. And that's where I champion that we need um, different generations sitting together to say, okay, in your time, these were your challenges, or our parents, right, or grandparents, to say, these were your challenges, and my challenges are different now. Of course, they've always got a nexus where they meet, right, in terms of similarity, but the contexts are very different. Um, and I want to share one quick story is that one thing I learned is that we need to make politics, governance relatable. When I ran for office in 2021 here in Zambia's uh, general election, I realized that so many people, especially young women, young men, had never considered themselves to be part of the governance or the political process. And what I did out of that election, despite coming second on the ballot and being an independent, I don't have lots of funding, I related with the people during my campaign or people that were supporting me. You'd actually find that it was older people because they were able to mentor me and see that I have taken in their advice, but we're able to work together.
Mm,
And but out of that lesson, I've learned, and even as we capacitate many young people on the African continent, that engagement is a two-way street. Politicians, policymakers need to meet us, the young people, halfway, to create spaces for young voices. But what I've said is, young people, if you see people are not giving you the platform, I mean, I am where I am today because I literally know if I'm supposed to be in that youth meeting, I haven't been invited, I don't sit back. I carry my chair and I gate crash because I know that's where I belong and where I can add value to the conversation. So for young people and the policymakers, we need to find a way in which we meet midway point, but we need to begin to step up as well to responsibly take up the roles of leadership. As you're listening to this, ask yourself what's one thing you're willing to do to make your voice heard, to make impact and change in your community as a young person. Remember that it may not be paid, you have to volunteer for it
mm.
in the beginning and sacrifice. But what change are you willing to create for your country, change and shift for the young people?
That is true. You know, the saddest part that I am personally noticing nowadays is that even though we're not colonized in the form of where how we were colonized before, slowly the feeling of nationalism is getting washed away from our hearts. So people are
Mm,
now just living to get food, to get something to drink, something to survive on, you know? So
yeah,
now the neo-colonialism, one of the things that it is impacting on us is by demolishing, by damaging, by taking away the sense of nationalism that we have. And I feel like for me, I love my country. I love my continent. I'm born here. I'm an African. I'm so proud of it. So I do ask myself that question. But when we ask how many of those people living here in Africa have that sense of nationalism and that sense of
patriotism, I
belongingness,
agree.
that
Mm.
that is something that is very debatable, I can say. But regarding that, what I want to ask you is, I do agree that currently the youth is ready to take over without
Mm.
overstepping the past generation. I know the youth is ready to create a link, but I do believe that at the same time, there's a lot of challenge that the youth is facing when it comes to getting out there, making their voice heard. So, what is it that you have to say for the youth that you believe that the youth should keep in mind while creating that space for their voice to be heard?
As young people, we need to remember, first of all, that politics isn't just about a title. It's not about running for office, but it's about ensuring that when you get in there, you're able to have integrity, first of all. You're able to build coalition and be very strategic. I mean, we have seen a lot of notion which people say politics or governance or public office is a very dirty job. You need to ensure that when you get in there, you're grounded in your own authentic values, in your principles, and in your morals.
Usually what we notice nowadays is that the youth has been suppressed in a lot of ways, and because of that, the way that it approaches to those that are responsible to answer their question is somehow through force. So as a person that works with the youth, as a youth, what is that you recommend for the youth to put in consideration while making their voice heard?
The first thing I always say is young people must realize that politics isn't about or governance or taking up decision making isn't about a title or political office and running for office, but it's about young people showing their patriotism, their integrity, number two, and most importantly, realizing that when they get into that role, they must be authentic to be able to shape policies. They should be able to build coalitions, but to be very strategic about how they want to see change. Change will not happen, or youth leadership in a vacuum. So young people need to definitely step up and have a better mindset about how to dominate and take over the spaces.
So, as I have mentioned earlier, we are in this era where everyone's trying to get the best out of everything. So, especially currently, our continent, Africa, is facing the new colonialism, which is something that we are all trying to avoid, I can say, but we are getting impacted one way or another with the technology and globalization. So, one of the weapons that our colonizers are using in this moment is war, so that
Yeah.
we're not stable enough to think, we're not stable enough to dream big, to see beyond and see the bigger picture. And recently what happened in Sudan, especially the war that's going on around the world, around Africa, is so heartbreaking to see. So, and because of that, one of the weapon that they use, one of the mechanism they use in that war is gender-based violence.
Mm.
I know there's a lot of things that you can say, but the damage and all the impact that it's going to have in the future is something very scary to think, I believe. What is it that you have to say, especially regarding war and human rights and gender-based violence?
So I'll start off with talking about the effects of war, especially from a human rights perspective. Sega, just like you've outrightly put it, Africa is facing a lot of conflict. Even when you come to the southern part of where I'm coming from Africa, um, in DRC, in Mozambique, there's a lot of conflict. And I believe that conflict strips people of everything, of
Yeah,
their home, of their
yeah,
dignity, of their hope.
yeah.
And you also see that there are a lot of human rights violations that we see during war, displacement, people losing their homes, a lot of gender based violence in the aspect even of sexual violence, child soldiers being recruited from early ages. And I believe at the center and the forefront of most of these wars are women and the youth, children who are often hard hit. And I think they're the ones that are leading the rebuilding afterwards. You've given the example of what's happening in Sudan. The conflict has really uprooted millions, and women have been born out of the brunt of this violence. And yet, there are a lot of people that are at the forefront of a lot of peace building efforts. But this is where I see an opportunity for a lot of us young people on the continent, even if you feel you do not come from Sudan, but you need to stand in solidarity to push for women's or youth inclusion in peace processes, not there being merely there because of like token participants or tokenisms, right? But being there maybe as the mediators, the negotiators, and to ensure that there's conflict prevention. And for a lot of young people, we need to realize that war anywhere is war everywhere. It affects a lot of things. We saw what happened
True.
with Russia and Ukraine and how it affected millions of people, even in Africa. And one will ask, but Russia and Ukraine are very far away. How did it impact Africa? Do you know that even for African countries, some were getting their grains or exchange and trade, even in terms of their fertilizers for their agriculture. And because of that war, it impacted so many other communities that are dependent perhaps on agriculture. And with the effects, especially of climate change that we're facing, a lot of this, including the war, has impacted lives. So we need to realize that issues even of gender-based violence is something where many of us know about it or know someone, that has been affected by it, but we need to go beyond doing likes and shares, on some of these wars. But we need to find a way in which we communicate and help the communities that are being affected by a lot of wars that are at the forefront of gender based violence. I think currently what's very frustrating is that we've often put the burden of the change on survivors, right? That are at the forefront of conflict, that are at the forefront of war. Um, but this isn't just an issue we should take lightly. It's a human issue. It's a human rights issue, and we need a lot of African countries, a lot of governments to find a way in which we call out actions and communities to challenge the norms that are there. We need to ensure that we hold hands together and promote for a lot of peace, to find a way in which we negotiate. I mean, people that are at the forefront of the war, even the perpetrators of these wars, are human beings. I believe that there's nothing too difficult to find for them to be changed or to create a way in which we can seize the fire.
Mm,
Um, and personally, for those that will be listening from civil society, from NGOs, international cooperating partners, I have seen the power of creating safe spaces, even across different regions, solidarity. We need to create a lot of environments where the youth, the women, the persons with disabilities at the forefront of GBV, of in conflict risk zones, to know that they've got a safe place where they can flee and not also be subjected to more infringement on their human rights.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah,
I believe we can mention a lot of things. Gender based violence is something very
yeah,
hot issue when we talk about wars, especially happening right now in Africa.
yeah,
But some other points that I would love to talk about is because since we're wrapping up, we say
yeah.
Africa is rich, Africa has a lot of resources, Africa is
Mm,
the future. That's something that we keep on saying, and I believe that we can say the government or those people that are in the areas of policy making are just a manifestation of the society. And the summation of me and you, the thoughts that we have, the decisions that we make in our daily lives, and the change that we make on ourselves,
mm,
that all together summed up is what we will see manifesting in our country, I believe, and then in
so
our
true.
continent. So we shouldn't see it as a big thing. We have to break it down and see it as an individual change, an individual
I
step
agree.
and decision that we take. But last but not least, Ruth, I know we can again say a lot of things, but last but not least, what I would love to ask you is, as we are saying that Africa is the future and that Africa is blessed
Mm,
naturally by God, what is it that we have to do that maybe the government is responsible or the people are responsible or different organizations, NGOs are responsible to put the force and put the encouragement for our continent to be better? What is it that we have to do to create that unity, that peace and united, Africa that we all want to see?
yeah. And I believe these will definitely be my wrapping up remarks to say. I think I want to leave people as they listen to this with the fact that they need to realize, especially for the young people, that we've got more power than we realize. Whether young people are at the grassroots organizing or in the diaspora, but still African citizen, your efforts matter. We need to find a way in which we stop our our God-given natural resources from being exploited here in Africa. Young people need to realize that a lot of the extractive industry, we're losing our resources, but the change is not going to happen overnight. It doesn't it doesn't stop where we just think we go out and talk about an issue one day and it ends there. We need to be very consistent and realize that um, we can tackle the problem and ensure that we see the Africa that we want. But how we do this is find a way in which we amplify amplify our voices on critical issues and taking away emotions, perhaps, to find a way in which we champion for African countries to have very strong legal frameworks and a mindset change. Right now, Sega, we're trying to promote for the free movement of persons on the African continent. Many people have got restrictions in terms of visa. We need to find a way in which we bring out those issues. A lot of young people aren't even aware of what Agenda 2064 is, Agenda 2030, or the Sustainable Development Goals. But we need to ensure that young people begin to equip themselves to participate, to be at the forefront, to also take up the mantle. We're the people that decide the way the destiny of Africa will be. And if we're not an informed citizenry, if we don't step up, if we don't take interest in what's happening at the center of these wars and conflict in Africa, which is also directly back to our natural or mineral resources, we need to find a way to protect ourselves. Of course, we can't adopt Western ideologies and take them as is. We're an African people, and we need to remember that. If we need to study the best model or a practice which is good for us, the African people, I believe that we can adopt that. But we should realize, first of all, who we are as a people. I think those are my last remarks.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much, Ruth Kay. I know we can mention a lot of things, we can discuss on a lot of things, I believe, but the last remark that you said is really important. Self-consciousness and the collective consciousness that we need is, it's not far. Awareness is the major thing that we can use to create that. I believe so. Thank you so much, Ruth, for giving me your time, for sharing me your angles, your views on the topics that we just talked. If there's anything else that you love to have, you love to add, anything else you love to say, let me give you the last chance. But if so, we can conclude.
My last word really is for young people to carry their chairs to the table. If you're not invited to the table, realize that you're going to be the dinner. So carry your seats to the table. Thank you for being here and listening. But let's carry this energy that we have, the innovation, the
Yes.
ideas, to keep building the Africa we want to see.
Yes. Thank you so much again. Have a blessed time, and I hope
Thank
I'll see
you.
you soon.
Definitely will. Thank you so
Yes.
much.
So guys, this is what we had for you on our coffee time. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let us know what you guys think on our short SMS 6121. And as in for our digital media audiences, please feel free to share us your insights below this video. We'll pass on to the second segment.